welcome to the Own Your Peace podcast. I'm your host, Andy Thewison, and today is going to be an episode that's really close to my heart and a lot of vulnerability. I want to take you on a journey to meet my dad through the lens of human design. For those of you who are new here, my dad was called home back in December, and it was a really big surprise. It wasn't expected. He'd gotten sick and had pneumonia, and he had his oxygen levels were not great, so they had put him on oxygen. And I would call him and check on him. His spirits were always high, and he just was annoyed with this oxygen tank, and he hated it. So I kept checking in to see how things were going, and I wasn't too overly concerned. He's older. He was 77, but old people get sick, and he'd been sick before, and we just get over it, and he just needed a little extra oxygen at the time. So Saturday night before he passed away, he died on a Sunday. We had a Christmas party with friends. It was a fun night. Kelly and I got all dressed up in crazy Christmas clothes, and it was just a really fun evening with friends. I woke up Sunday morning to a bunch of texts and calls from my mom that dad had a really rough night and that I should probably come home to see him. They live in Idaho, so it's about a 3.5-hour drive. I called my sister, and we were both going back and forth. We both have families, and Sundays are our day home with families. So we were trying to decide if we were going to go up on Sunday or if we were going to wait and head up on Monday. My sister felt really strongly that we should just go. So I was like, okay, let's do it. I know her life is harder to rearrange than mine. So I was like, whatever works for you, let's do it. We drove up, and as we were driving, we were getting texts from my mom that dad's doing better. He just had a really rough night, but he's turned a corner and things are looking good. He's eaten and things were positive. So we were like, it'll be fun to just see dad and boost his morale and cheer him up with his girls. And we got to about Blackfoot on our way, and that's about probably 30 minutes from Idaho Falls, where my dad was in the hospital. And at that time, my mom called and told us that it had turned and we needed to hurry and we needed to come. So at that point, we did not tell my mom that we were on our way. We were going to surprise them and show up to talk to him and cheer him up. The energy of our drive shifted quite urgently when we got the call from my mom. At that point, we turned up the speed and we were on our way to the hospital. When we walked into the hospital, I remember seeing my mom, and I've never seen her look so small. She was scared to death, and she was outside my dad's room, and all the doctors were in his room, and the light outside his room, because so he had coded. And so that is what me and my sister walked in on, was him coding. And it was terrifying of walking into this mass chaos. Obviously it wasn't chaos because they know what they're doing. They tried to usher us out and make us wait in a waiting room. And both my sister and I, no, we're not going anywhere. We'll stand out of the way, but we are not leaving where we can see our dad. So we waited. And they were working on him for quite a while because he had coded, and they were trying to do all these life-saving things to bring him back. And we just waited, and it was excruciating because there was nothing we could do. And we were just there with my mom and being there with her during this process. And as we waited, I felt so much love for my dad and for the role that he had played in my life. And he wasn't perfect. No parent is, but he has always and forever been my biggest cheerleader. Back when I started my blog, he was probably the only person who read it for a little bit. He was always so proud and bragging to all his friends about his daughter, and he meant the world to me. And we had a very close relationship. We were very similar. I would probably say out of all his children, I'm probably the most like him. And so it was hard sitting there not knowing if he was going to make it or not. And so after what felt like an eternity, it was probably about 45 minutes to an hour that they worked on him. They were able to bring him back to a steady state. They cleared the room out. So we were able to go in, and he was still at that point, he wasn't coherent. He was in a coma. And the only thing really keeping him alive at that point was the medicine. They were very honest with us, and I appreciate the honesty, but was still really hard to hear. They said right now it's a minute to minute basis. And then if he makes it through the night, then it's a day by day basis. And then from there, we go day by day. So he is in a very critical state at this point. But we were able to go in and spend time with him and hold his hand. And I could still feel his energy in the room. And I knew that he knew that we were there. And he was grateful that we had made it to be there more than anything for my mom, was what I was feeling. And so we sat around and we spent time with him. And we each took turns being one-on-one with him, where we had the room to ourselves and we were able to say goodbye, hoping that it wasn't goodbye. The conversation I had with my dad was very much, please fight to stay if you can. I understand if it's your time to go. I love you, but I want you to stay. I need you to stay. And that was very selfish of me, I'm going to admit. But it was, if you need to go, I understand. I love you. And I would love you to really fight to stay. And we each took our turn and I held my dad's hand. And I remember telling him, I need you to come back because I want to hear about this near-death experience. I want to hear what it's like on the other side. And my dad and I have always teased each other and had a really fun back and forth energy between the two of us. And so I was like, Dad, you have to come back. I want to hear all the details of your near-death experience. But I understand if it's time to go, I'll be okay. And you better come and haunt me. I want to know that you're still around. I want to feel your energy from time to time if it is time to go. That was my conversation with him during those last moments. And finally, visiting hours were over. So they kicked us out and we had to go home and had to leave him in that hospital bed. That was really hard. So we went to go get dinner. It was obviously not something we wanted to do, but we needed to eat. So we'd ordered our food and we probably took about maybe 4 or 5 bites of our food before we got a call from the hospital that he had coded again. We knew that if he coded again, he wasn't going to make it. So we knew at that point that we were driving back to the hospital to say a final goodbye to our dad. And so that was a really hard car ride. I know my mom still had hope in her heart that he would be saved and that a miracle would happen. But I knew, based on what the doctors were saying, and just I knew that we were going to have to say goodbye to my dad. A really hard car ride. There was a song that came coming to me, and it was the song. It's called "How Do I Say Goodbye," and it's a beautiful song. I'll link it in the show notes so that you can listen to it, especially if you've lost somebody. It's going to mean a lot, especially if you lost a dad, because this was very much tied to the energy of losing a father. That's what the song's about. So we were playing that on repeat as we headed back to the hospital. And as we walked into the hospital, they were again all around his room. And the doctor was so kind and had the sweetest heart. He came out to us and he was like, he's probably not going to make it. We can keep working on him. But at this point, I don't think we can save him. Is it okay if we stop working on him and let him go? Yeah, we had to say yes. We had to say it's okay. Let him go. And so we let him go. And it was so hard to see any energy that we felt of him was gone. It was very quick after they stopped working on him that he was completely gone. It would have been a waste of their time and their energy to keep working on him because it was time. It was time for him to go. So we sat there and stayed there for several hours waiting for the funeral home to come pick up his body. We stayed till they came to get his body. And we just sat around this beautiful man who was my father and my mom's husband. And we told stories and shared how much he had meant to us. And it was a really special time with my sister and my mom, and my brother came for a little bit. And it was really hard. saying goodbye to someone who was your whole world. I don't care how much of a grown up adult you are and how much you don't think you need your parents anymore. Losing your dad or losing any parent is tragic. It's like the rug was ripped out from underneath me and I lost complete groundedness. I felt like I had lost my center. My navigational system was gone in a heartbeat. I always thought I don't need my parents. I'm a strong, independent woman. And I knew pretty dang quickly that that was not the case. I need my dad. And I love my dad. Like I mentioned earlier, he was always my greatest supporter. One of my favorite things he would do is he would read my daily horoscopes or read a post that I had written on Instagram or on the blog. And he had follow-up questions, the Gemini in him. And he always would be like, so you said this, what does that mean? And he always was so curious. He was a strong, devout Mormon. So in a lot of ways, this was very contra to his belief system, all this woo-woo stuff that I was into. But it didn't stop him from trying to understand my life and the work that I do. And I will never forget how much that meant to me when he would pop in on my text on my phone and be like, hey, you said this today. What does that mean? I'm curious about that. And he always asked the best questions. And he was so engaged in my content and was my biggest fan. So I miss those random text follow-up questions from the content that I post. And I will always miss those. And like I said, he was my everything. And he meant so much to me. So today, I want to talk about grief. And I kind of want to go over my dad's human design chart and share, kind of in hindsight, the things that I saw from his human design chart and how they played out in his life. So this really is a celebration of his life and a tribute to him and the amazing man and role model he was for me. So this is kind of a little bit more self-indulgent of an episode, but I think you'll also learn some things and understand him in a new way. And also, hopefully, maybe there's some things that resonate with you that you also have on your human design chart or people that you know that will give you some information for you as well. But about grief is I want you to understand that grief looks so different for everybody and there's no right or wrong way to grieve. I'm still very much in the grieving process. And there's some days where I feel really strong and I feel very good and confident and I feel like I'm in myself and in my center again. And then there's days where I get kicked and all of a sudden I'm back to square one. Something will just set me off and I'm in tears and I'm processing and it is hard. And it's like I'm in the mud again. And that's normal to have these resets back to dealing and being your grief being fresh again. And so I want to normalize that. I want to normalize that grief looks different for everybody. And there's no, this is how you grieve process. I remember being at my dad's funeral and me and my sister grieve so differently. Me and my mom are very similar. I found out on how we process grief. Both her and I went into hyper capability. We went into processing and planning and lining things up for the funeral and we stayed busy. So I volunteered to make the slide for my dad's funeral. I volunteered to write his life sketch. And I kind of like put on blinders and went into, I just need to stay busy and I need to focus and line up all these things so that his funeral runs smoothly. I need to help my mom with her finances and figure this stuff out and break things down and make sense of things. For me, hyper capability was a mask for me in my grief. I hid in the capability. I hid in doing all these things. So outwardly, it looked like I was processing and doing fine with all these things. And my sister is a very outwardly person with her grief process. She was crying buckets and was emotional wreck through the viewing, through the funeral. And she just was crying. And for me, I don't cry in public. I held that all in and I was emotional, obviously, but I kept it on my inside because I wasn't going to break down in front of other people. That's just who I am. I've always been that way. Maybe it's the Cancer in me that's like, yes, I feel everything and I feel everything super deeply, but nobody's going to see it. I'm going to hide. So nobody knows how much I'm actually feeling. And that was very much the vibe for me. So I was very much pulled together and very outwardly looked like I was strong. But my inward was falling apart. It was like a rug that was quickly unraveling, and I was barely keeping it together. But my sister was outwardly showing her emotions, where I was very stoic and very, outwardly had a face of having it together. And I remember people coming up to me at the funeral and being like, "How's your sister doing? She seems to be taking this so hard. Hope she's okay. You're so strong to be there for her." And I'm like, people, just because I'm not a hot mess on the outside doesn't mean I'm not a hot mess on the inside. So that's one thing I want to say. If you have people in your life who have lost somebody and outwardly they look like they've got their shiz together, I want you to understand that even though outwardly that's what it looks like, inwardly you don't know what's going on. They could be in a flood, drowning in their emotions, but they're not showing it. Just because you're not crying or outwardly expressing your emotions doesn't mean that they're not very real and deep and hard. So don't judge people by what they're outwardly showing when it comes to grief, because some of us are private grievers. We're not going to show the world how we feel on the inside. It's very much a private thing. And also, how we process emotions is so different. This is one of the coolest things I found out about human design. I'm an emotional, and then I have channel 3740. So it's the channel of community. So that's why I really love building a community. But with the 3740, it also, kind of a fun fact with emotional center, whatever channel defines your emotional center tells you how you process emotions. It's how you process your emotional waves. So with a 3740, it is a buildup where it can feel like you're very detached from your emotions in the now moment. And then you bottle, not process. And then all of a sudden, somebody will look at you wrong or something will happen, and all of a sudden you are overreacting to this one thing, but it's not necessarily the one thing that you're reacting to. It's to all this stuff you have not processed. And that is very much how I process emotions. That's how it's been my whole life, where I bottle, not process. And all of a sudden I am processing it all and I overreact in situations that have nothing to do with the situation. I'm just processing. I'm letting all this stuff I haven't processed move through that trigger. So if you have a 3740 or a 1949 channel, this is how you process emotions. You're a bottler, and then you will have emotional times where you release all these emotions you've held up. So there very much is this bottling of emotions. So that is what I did. I bottled my emotions. So outwardly, I wasn't crying and showing my emotions. I didn't process them. I was very detached from my emotions during the whole funeral, inwardly a mess, but I wasn't processing. So, and to this day, I'm still processing these emotions, and it's usually random weird things that set them off that allow me to process the emotions of losing my dad. And usually it's something that Kelly says. Poor Kelly. He's such a good sport. Where he'll say something that angers me, and that little weird thing that he said, most of the time it would have rolled off my back. But because I haven't processed, it was the trigger to allow me to process. He's been so patient with me when he sees whatever he said, triggered me processing all my emotions. So he's been very, very patient with me and so loving. And I'm so grateful for him and all of this. That's how it's been for me. So really have patience for people and how they are processing emotion. My sister is an open emotional center. So it makes sense to me in a logical sense of why she was so outwardly emotional at the funeral, is because she's not only feeling her own emotions, she's literally a sponge for everybody else's emotions at this funeral. And she's like feeling and emoting for everyone. So it was a lot because she was feeling her emotions, and then everybody who came through the line, so much emotions she was processing. That was the only way she could move through it, was to have these continual releases of emotions and moving through them. So she was breaking down and being a hot mess through the whole thing. She was also not only feeling her emotions, but she's feeling everybody else's. So it was a lot, where my emotions were my own and I bottled and I didn't process them. So it's interesting when we take a step back and realize that human design is very real. And it is a very strong indication about how we process our emotions and how we process our grief. So yeah, I'm still struggling. I still have hard days. I'm not gonna lie. There are days when I just want to disconnect from the world and pretend that the rest of the world doesn't exist, and I want to hide. and I allow it. And I have learned to have a lot of patience with the grieving process, that it isn't linear and isn't, oh, it's been a few months, I should be okay. No, I'm still not okay. I don't know if I'll ever be okay. There's still going to be days where I really miss my dad. I wish that he was sending me a text asking me about my post for the day. And I constantly will feel him. And that's one thing that is really cool about my gifts as an intuitive and a medium, where I do feel energies from the other side, is I do feel him very often. And it's really fun when I do feel him, and I can feel him, his snarkiness and his fun and his playfulness. And it means the world to me that I can still very much feel him. And I think that helped also, not that it made it any easier, because there's nothing better than just picking up your phone and calling somebody that you love, but I do feel him very much. And that does give me peace of mind that this isn't the end, that just because someone passes, that's not over. We have this whole nother world we enter into where we still have communications with those that we love. They're still there. I still feel my grandpa. I feel my grandma from time to time. And now I feel my dad. And in true Glenn fashion, he is still very much a cheerleader in my life, very much a guide, and helping me as I move forward, emerging from my own grief in a place where I'm at least steady enough to start taking tactical action on achieving what I know I need to be doing. And I feel him, and I feel him being like, stop being fearful. You've got this. I'm cheering you on. I'm so excited to see how this goes for you. You're amazing. You just being my dad. And he's with me all the time. And I know he's with my mom a lot. And I feel like right now she needs him more, and that's okay. They were married and she does need him more, but he does come and visit me and check in on me. And I feel him frequently. And it's usually like when I'm working that I feel him the most, because I think that's what we had most in common, is we were both dreamers. My dad, he signed up for every MLM. He was a dreamer. He wanted his ship to come in, and maybe some of his dreams never came true. He struggled for most of his lifetime financially and making his dreams a reality, but it never stopped him from dreaming and never stopped him from taking chances. And that's the legacy that he's left me is, and this is the message that I've gotten from him, is like, hey, sweetie, I know I didn't always make my dreams come true, but I'm going to help you make your dreams come true. And so I know that he is there and he's helping to facilitate and to bring me opportunities so that these things that I dream about and these big swings that I want to take in this lifetime are accomplished because I have him by my side. And we're going to dream together. So this is for you, Dad. And so my dad was a 1-3 pure manifesting generator. He was a Gemini, a Scorpio rising, and then a Sag moon. And that Sag moon is where he was the dreamer. He had big epic dreams, and I think sometimes he just didn't have a way of making them a reality. And that's where his biggest hang was. So, and he had this intensity with Scorpio rising. But it's interesting that we have a lot of the same energy. So I'm a Cancer sun, Scorpio moon, and then a Sag rising. So we had two of the same big three, obviously in different placements, but we had this tenacity to be intense and going after what we want, but also this like shoot for the stars, happy go lucky, like we want to do big things. So we are both dreamers. And I love that. And I'm glad that I have that in me as well. So as a 1-3 manifesting generator, the manifesting generator, he pivoted all the time. He graduated school in public speaking, a degree in public speaking, because he wanted to be a minister. And I think he would have been a really good minister, but he had other plans were placed before him. So he chose to join the Mormon faith, where they don't have paid clergy. So that was off the table of becoming a minister. And then he married my mom, and he got his, he worked to get his license to work in insurance and selling insurance. So he did that for quite a while. And then he always would get bored and would need to pivot. So I remember him always having different jobs. So he was constantly pivoting and moving and doing different things. And it was very much this roller coaster of him moving through life and doing different things. My mom's a man gen too. So for the both of them, they had all this energy and all this movement, all this pivoting throughout life. So there was a lot of like uncertainty and movement throughout my childhood. We moved a lot. We would do different jobs, different opportunities would pop up for my dad, and he would run with it. It's interesting. If you look at my chart, Uranus is conjunct my moon in the 12th house. So there was always this like upheaval in my childhood, and things constantly moved and were not stable in the best way possible, right? And so that was his trajectory. He did lots of things. He worked for Charles Schwab, and that's how I got my job at Charles Schwab and where I started. And we would watch the nightly business report, and we both loved talking about the stock market and what it was doing and these different companies. And he was always a dreamer. He loved to buy penny stocks and particularly mining gold and silver penny stocks. So that was his jam. He would research and find these little penny stocks. And he would bet on these things. Did a lot of his bets pay off? No, they were penny stocks. They did not pay off, but he would dream that they would. And so there was this playfulness about him where he would dream and he would do these things. And like I said, there was always this constant movement in his life. And then as a 1-3, I also have a line 1. And if you're a line 1, there's this wanting to go to the depths to understand the world that we live in. So you need knowledge and information to feel secure. So there's always this effervescent need to learn, to absorb information. My dad was always a scholar. He was very intellectual, that Gemini energy. He loved learning new things. So he's always reading books, always seeking out knowledge. And he loved learning about different golds and silvers. And he loved these things. And then he had the line 3. So the 3 is your life's going to be crazy. They're both learning lines. So we have this line 1 that's like, I'm going to dive into the information. I'm going to go deep on this information. Google was invented for you, so you could Google anything. If you have a line 1 in your life, they literally cannot make it through a movie without Googling something. Guilty, myself. And then we have this 3, but it's a tactical type of learning. It's a learning of like, oh, that stuff's hot. I'm going to touch it and find out. I'm going to believe you. I'm going to figure it out for myself. So there is this failing forward energy with a line 3. So they're going to study it and then they want to test it out. So I call 1-3s the establishers of knowledge and truth because they are constantly taking in information, learning it, and then they're testing it out. So there is this learning and testing, and that is a process. So they are moving through life in this whole trial and error process. So a lot of times their trials don't work and they like, well, that didn't work. Let's figure it out. I always say that line 3s have this Thomas Edison energy to it. They didn't fail 10,000 ways. They just found out 10,000 ways a light bulb didn't work. And then they finally are able to like learn from things. So my dad's life was very much this trial and error process. Well, that didn't work. Let's try something else. And so he really moved through life with this trial and error process. And he had a very defined throat. He was a manifesting generator. He had so many activated gates in his throat. So he would love to talk. And, he would have been probably a very influential pastor because he had the gift of gab and he had a gift of speaking and orating because of that Scorpio rising. He had this depth to him. He sat and observed the world. And then when he talked, he always had these really beautiful insights that he would bring to a conversation. And it would always be like, oh, I didn't even know you were paying attention. But he was always paying attention. He was always observing. He was always taking information and learning. And then he had this depth that he brought to conversations. And so he kind of almost like lived in his own little world sometimes. And it felt like he was a little disconnected from it. But he was always processing information and learning from the world around him. He had a really hard childhood because he was born in 1947. So there wasn't really a whole lot of information about learning disabilities. So he had ADHD. I'm pretty sure of it. I don't think he was ever actually diagnosed, but he had a really hard time focusing. And then he had dyslexia. So learning for him on an intellectual basis in the time period was really hard for them. And there was not a lot of resources available to him to help him. But he had a mother who was so there that she did not accept that there wasn't an option for her son. So she worked really hard to help him to grasp concepts and to learn things in a different way so that he would get it. And in a lot of ways, that was really austere and hard because she pushed so hard for him to get things because his two younger brothers, their brains didn't work the same way. They weren't neurodivergent. So she was very much a big figure in his life. But I think in a lot of ways, although she pushed really hard and loved him so dearly because she wanted him to be successful, in a lot of ways, they're built in beliefs within him that he wasn't smart or that he wasn't like everybody else. So when I look at his astrology chart, it was kind of interesting. The other day, I was cleaning out my office and I came across my dad's birth chart because when he came to visit us over 4th of July weekend, he was like, I want you to go over my birth chart with me and help me understand it. Like, I want to get this. And I was like, sure, Dad, I'd love to, go over and answer your questions about your birth chart. And I did that over 4th of July weekend. It was a really kind of a cute little moment with my dad. But I looked at his chart and it just randomly came across it. And oh my goodness, I tell you what, that did me in. That was a hard day because it just reminded me of what an amazing person he is. And I remember looking at his birth chart and I noticed that his Chiron was in the first house. And I don't know why it didn't stand out before because, I'm busy. I didn't even think anything of it. But it just hit me how hard that placement must have been for him and how that held him back in a lot of ways. Because if we look at Chiron, it is the wounded healer. So anywhere that Chiron is in our chart and what house it's in is going to show us where our biggest wounds are and what we're meant to overcome. And with Chiron being in the first house, it's how we view ourselves. It's our self-esteem. It's our sense of who we are and how we show up in the world. So I can see throughout his life how all these things made him question his sense of self and if he was good enough. And that really oof. I see that so much with my dad. And I think it held him back in a lot of ways. And I wish I knew what I knew now so I could be like, Dad, you're amazing. This is why you have these beliefs about yourself. Let's clear them. And so that you can step into, truly loving and honoring the unique and very different soul that you are, because you're amazing. But yeah, that was kind of a fun little moment that I had with my dad. I almost think I felt like it was left there for me to find because I needed that connection to my dad that day. But I see how this theme played out through his life. And I wish I knew more about this stuff earlier in his life, but it's fascinating to me. So his sense of self was his biggest hurt that he was meant to overcome in this life. And I think in a lot of ways he did. He did a lot of things. I mean, he was very, very popular within his group of friends in Idaho Falls. He had no problem speaking in church. He loved to speak in church. He loved teaching and he loved speaking. So he would often be, teaching in those positions. His cognition, his, spidey sense, how he read other people was through touch. So my dad was a hugger. He could be awkward about it. I'm being honest. But he loved to shake hands. That was his thing. He wasn't always hugging people, but he loved to shake hands. He liked to make contact with people because when you have a touch as your determination, that's your biggest sense of reading other people is through your hands. So he wanted to make contact with his hands. He wanted to shake your hand. He wanted to put his hand on your back because that's how he read people. So it's fascinating to me, all these beautiful little things about my dad that I see so fully in his birth chart. And on his human design chart. So his environment was shores. So shores people love to have people come to them and they love to be near the water. So my dad loved these things. He loved to be near, lakes and things, but he also has really loved people to come to him and to have conversations with him and to interact with people. He loved people. He loved sharing his story with people. His son is in gate 35, which is sharing your experiences. So he loved telling people his stories. He also loved hearing people's stories because he loved hearing what brought them to that point, because he knew by listening to other people's stories, he learned. He was an observer in a lot of ways. I think that was the Scorpio rising in him, where he just loved to hear and understand people and what made people tick. That's that detective side of him. But he was a dreamer, and there's so many beautiful things as I look at his chart. I could go on for hours. But it's fun to have these moments where see my dad through a new lens of human design. Like, I read this chart for him when he was here and he loved it. He thought it was cool. I don't really understand that stuff, but it makes sense. Like, I get it. Like, that's totally how I do things. And that's curious. I wouldn't have thought about it that way, but I like it. And that was just who he was. He, in true Gemini fashion, he loved to talk. He loved to talk to people. He loved interacting with people. And he was very likable. He's very charismatic. He has gate 34, which is the gate of natural charisma. So when he was excited about something, there was this like X factor to him where he would talk about it. I look back at videos of my dad, and he's very charismatic when he wants to be. And so it was fun to see that play out in him. And I think that's why he was such a great speaker when he would teach, is because he does have that ability to be very charismatic in his speech and the way that he sees the world. And so I won't go into this too much because we're already at over 40 minutes of me talking about my dad. And this is more an episode for me and a tribute to him. But I want to leave on some of the most important things that I learned from my dad, and things that I will always remember most about him, and things I will always treasure about him is I want you to always remember to dream. Even if your dreams don't come true, there is always reach for more. He also used to say, like, shoot for this moon and you'll land in the stars. And I love that. And I love that he always constantly pushed me to dream and to want for more. Even if it didn't always pan out for him, he still had that adventurous, beautiful heart of searching and dreaming for more, even to his last days. He was telling my mom, he's like, I found this job and I think it's going to be it'll be a nice little extra income for our family. And I'm really excited about how this is going to pan out. And we're going to start this at the beginning of the year. So he, even in his last days, he had this tenacity and this dreaming of creating more for himself and my mom. So it would have been fun to see if that job would have panned out the way that he wanted it to. That was going to start at the beginning of the year. Even at 77, he was going to, he was retired, but he wanted more for my mom and him. And he wanted to create more income and abundance for them. So he was dreaming. He had worked it out to create something. I don't know all the details of it, but he was talking about it. And I don't think he thought he was going to go. I think I've actually talked to a couple of different mediums, and that was kind of the energy of when they tapped into him and they spoke with him, he was surprised too. He's like, I don't know why I'm not alive. I thought I was going to walk out of this hospital and be just fine. So he's, I think, still a little bit in shock that he's dead. I mean, we all are, right? Because it happened so fast, but never stop dreaming. That's one of my biggest takeaways from my dad, is never stop dreaming. Another thing is to love people and to be a cheerleader for the people in your lives. He always was such a champion for everybody around him. He always wanted to know what was going on in your life, what you were up to. Like, he always was asking, Kelly, what are you doing? Like, what's going on at work? I want to hear all about it. And then with, Matt and Casey, all my whole family, he was always so intrigued and interested and captivated by our lives. And he wanted to know all the details. And he always asked really great questions. He had a really good way of making you feel important and making you feel loved by being interested in our lives. And I think that's an amazing gift that he had. He really had this gift of helping people feel important, because he asked questions and he was engaged in what was going on and the people in his life. And he observed it all. And he was so proud. He was always talking about me and my siblings to his friends. He loved bragging. One of the fun things is, we were able to get his phone and we were looking through his pictures that he had taken, the world through his eyes. And there were all pictures of us and us doing mundane, boring things. But they were important to him. He had pictures of our cars because they thought they were cool, pictures of our houses and what we were doing and us playing with our kids. And these mundane, monotonous moments that he had captured on his little phone and him observing us. There's like a picture of me like sitting on the couch, just chilling on my phone. And it was just this cute little, like, he saw us. And be ever an observer of others. Learn from those around you. Be interested in other people. Ask really good questions. He was so good about asking questions. And that was one of the things I will miss the most. Be a champion and a cheerleader for the people in your life. There's no better way to make people feel loved than is to be their champion, to support them, and to be a cheerleader in your life. I will take that to the day I die, to be a cheerleader and a champion for my children. And I hope that I can bring that legacy into my own experience and share that with my kids, that I'm always there for them. I'm always supporting them. I'm their biggest cheerleader. I'm curious about their lives. And that's a really big thing. And I hope that I'm able to be that for my kids and I can bring that legacy forward. And another thing is service. He loved to help other people. Sometimes he had to be invited to help. He did not just take initiative to help, but whenever you asked, he was right there to help. And he loved serving and helping other people. He volunteered to the last weeks of his life. He would work in the temple and he would serve and help other people. He always was there to help other people. I loved having people come up to me who I didn't know at the funeral and through the line at the viewing, them telling me how much they appreciated my dad, how much they loved him, how much they always knew that they could call on Glenn to help, that he was always there if they needed him. And that's such a beautiful thing and such a beautiful legacy to leave behind, of one of service, of helpfulness to those around us. He was always there when you needed him. And I appreciate that so deeply. Those are some main key takeaways. And always be curious, always be open to learning more. And that's one thing I do appreciate about him is he wasn't closed off. Even though what I do is not really in alignment with the Mormon faith anymore, he was always still very curious and always had questions for me. And it means the world to me. And I hope this little tribute did him justice. And I hope that he's shining down on me and I can feel him actually. He's here in this room with me. And I'm so grateful for him. I'm grateful for his legacy. I hope I make him proud. I hope that together we make some dreams come true and we create a legacy that he would be proud of. So I hope you found this episode helpful. I hope that you can take some key takeaways from what I've learned about my father. And remember that grieving looks different for everybody. And have patience for the people in your life who are moving through it. I will leave with this. There was one person that left me a message on Instagram, and it was such a grounding force for me that I need to share it. So she'd also lost her dad, and she told me grieving feels like getting kicked off the merry-go-round of life, where you get kicked off. You had this traumatic event happen to you where your entire foundation has completely changed. And now you have to look at the merry-go-round and have to figure out how to get back on. And that is exactly for me how grief felt. It felt like I got kicked off. Like all of a sudden the world kept spinning and I had this big, awful thing happen to me where my whole entire world changed overnight. And all of a sudden I have to look at how do I get back on? How do I move forward after something so traumatic happened? And I think that's true with, losing people, but also traumatic events that happen in our lives is we have to try and figure out how to get back on that carousel. And sometimes that takes time. Have patience with yourself. Give yourself grace. There's going to be days where you're ready to get back on, and then there's going to be days where you're not so ready to get back on. So have patience. And you got this. Whether you're in the thick of grief right now or you don't have any experience with it, one day you will. And I hope that you remember this. And I hope that you remember to have grace with yourself. And for my dad and I, we love you. Thank you so much for supporting this dream that we have. Much love, and I'll talk to you next time.